The wind always feels different in that part of the cemetery. The air is thick, like it's clinging to something that doesn't want to be let go. It's the same every time I pass the row of old graves under the twisted oak tree, where the grass grows in a way that almost seems unnatural, as if the earth itself is reluctant to release the dead. The leaves never stop rustling, even when there's no breeze. It's like the wind itself remembers the weight of the memories held within that corner of the cemetery. At first, I thought it was just me. Maybe it was the isolation getting to my head, working the late hours, dealing with the dead day in and day out. But I knew better. There's something there, something that tugs at the edges of my mind every time I stand near that oak tree, and I never seem to be able to escape it. My name's Greg, I'm 41 years old, and I've been the cemetery keeper here for just over 12 years now. I know every inch of this place, I've seen it all. From the grand mausoleums at the front to the forgotten weathered graves at the back, where the only company you get is the occasional crow or squirrel. It's a quiet place, peaceful, almost, or at least it should be. Lately though, something's been pulling at me. I can't explain it. It's like my steps always lead me back to that one corner of the cemetery. At first, I just thought it was the wear and tear of being around death for so long. You start seeing things, shadows moving when no one's there, small noises in the dead of night that make you freeze in your tracks. But there was something different about that spot. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. There's a grave out there, hidden beneath the old oak. It's small, smaller than the others. You don't notice it unless you're paying attention. The grave marker is old, cracked, and weathered, barely legible anymore. The name on it is worn down to nothing, just a blur of letters and numbers. I've tended to that spot for years, never giving it much thought. It was just another grave, another nameless person left to the earth's embrace. But lately, the grave has been calling to me, drawing me in every time I pass by. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't even the gravestone itself. It was the feeling, the heaviness in the air when I got close, like something was waiting, or someone. It was a Thursday afternoon when I first noticed something was wrong. I had been walking along the farthest side of the cemetery, inspecting the overgrown grass, making a mental note of where I needed to trim back the ivy. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the rows of graves. When I reached the old oak tree, I paused. I don't know why, but I felt this sudden chill crawl up my spine. I glanced at the gravestone beneath the oak, the one I had seen countless times before. Only this time there was something new. The stone, though weathered and old, appeared fresher. The moss that had been growing around the edges had been scraped away. The name, which I had long assumed was too worn to read, was suddenly clearer than I had ever seen it before. I bent down, squinting to read it, and that's when I saw it, a child's name. Ellie. The last name was still unreadable, but the first name stood out to me. Ellie. It had always been there. I just hadn't seen it before. Or had I? I tried to shake the feeling of unease that crept into my chest as I looked around. It was like something was shifting in the atmosphere, and I couldn't quite place it. But the more I looked at that grave, the more I felt that pull. I couldn't stop staring at it. Something told me I needed to stay. The air around me seemed to thicken, and the rustling of the leaves grew louder, almost deafening. I looked around, but the cemetery was empty. There was no one else here, not a soul for miles, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone was standing just behind me, watching me. A low whisper filled the air, soft, like a child calling out in the distance. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then it happened again. I froze. The whisper was closer now, and it sounded like a voice, a child's voice, faint but unmistakable. "Help me," it said. I looked around, my heart racing. There was no one. The cemetery was silent once again. I took a step back, trying to gather myself. It must have been my imagination, but something told me I wasn't imagining it. The air was too thick, the leaves rustling too incessantly, and the grave had become something more. It had become alive. I felt a cold shiver run through me as I bent down to touch the gravestone. My fingers brushed against the cracked stone, and as I did, the whisper returned. This time it was louder, clearer. "Help me." I jerked my hand back, heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. It was something else, something I couldn't explain. A presence, a feeling of desperation, a child calling out from the grave. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a patch of uneven ground, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just experienced. But I knew deep down that there was no rational explanation. I had been coming to this cemetery for over a decade, and I had never felt anything like this. This was different. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the name Ellie in my mind, burning into my thoughts. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something important. So, I went back to the cemetery the next day. I couldn't help it. I had to know more. When I arrived, the air was heavy again. The cemetery felt more oppressive than usual, as if something were watching me from the shadows. I walked to the old oak tree, my footsteps feeling like they were muffled by the earth itself. When I reached the grave, I knelt down once more, trying to make sense of what had happened, but the gravestone had changed. It was almost as if the earth had swallowed it whole. The name was gone, replaced by a deep, dark crack that ran down the stone, splitting it in half. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The whispers were gone now. All that remained was silence, deep, suffocating silence. And then, just as I was about to leave, I felt it again, the unmistakable pull, the tugging at the edges of my mind. I turned, only to see a small figure standing behind me. A child, no more than 6 or 7 years old, with pale skin and hollow eyes. She stood there, watching me, her expression unreadable. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Help me." I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know what she wanted, but I could feel it in my bones. The weight of the forgotten, the weight of something long past, abandoned and lost. Something had been left behind in this cemetery, something I had ignored for far too long. And now, it was too late. I never saw the child again, but every time I walk past that spot, I feel her presence. Her eyes are always on me, watching, waiting, and every time, I hear the whisper, "Help me." I don't know what I could have done differently. I don't know how to make it right, but I do know this: the dead don't stay forgotten. Not forever, and the things we leave behind, they never leave us. The cemetery is always quiet at night, the kind of quiet that fills the air, settling deep into the bones. There's no wind to rustle the leaves, no distant footsteps to break the stillness, just an endless silence that seems to stretch on, like the world beyond the grave has already forgotten how to speak. But on nights like tonight, the quiet doesn't bring comfort. It feels like an old secret, one that has been buried so long it can no longer be hidden, waiting to be uncovered. The moon hangs low, casting pale light over the graves, their sharp edges softened by the shadows. But there's one spot, near the back of the cemetery, where the shadows seem to gather heavier, more densely. It's always been like that, as if the darkness doesn't want to leave. I've often passed it while doing my rounds, wondering why that section feels off. But tonight, it's different. There's something else there, something that wasn't there before, something I can feel even before I see it. My name is Sarah, and I've been working here at the cemetery for over 8 years now. I'm 34, but I feel like I've aged 10 years just from the weight of what I've seen. It's a solitary job, being the only keeper of a place like this. You get used to the solitude, the silence. You even learn to appreciate it, in a way. But lately, I've started to feel like I'm being watched, and not by the usual cemetery wanderers, the mourners who come to visit their lost loved ones. No, this is different. I noticed it first about a month ago, just as the autumn leaves started to fall. I was making my usual rounds, checking the gates, the paths, making sure the place stayed in order. Everything looked normal, until I reached the far corner of the cemetery, where the old crypts are. It's a section no one ever visits, the graves too old and forgotten. But as I passed by, I swear I saw something, no, someone, standing just inside the shadows near one of the tombstones. It was only for a moment, barely a flicker in the corner of my eye, but I froze. I couldn't explain why. There was no one else out there, no visitors, no one but me. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was tired from too many late nights. But the feeling didn't go away. In fact, it only grew stronger. Every night after that, I felt the same unease, that same sense of being watched, and it always led me back to the same place, that far corner, near the crypts. The shadows there seemed to stretch further than they should, as though they were reaching out to hold me. Tonight, I'm walking the cemetery again, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, the cold air biting at my cheeks. The moonlight casts long shadows across the graves, but the far corner remains darker than the rest. I find myself drawn to it, almost against my will. My breath catches in my throat as I approach the old crypts, and then I see it. A figure, standing just inside the shadows of the tombstone. A tall, gaunt shape, barely distinguishable from the dark. For a moment, I wonder if my mind is playing tricks on me, but as I get closer, I realize it's no illusion. The figure is real. It's a person, or at least it looks like one. My heart races as I take a step forward, my mind reeling. There's no one here at this hour, I'm sure of it. I've worked this shift countless times, and I've never seen anyone lurking out here before. As I step closer, the figure doesn't move, doesn't even acknowledge me. It stands perfectly still, as if it's waiting for something. I call out, my voice echoing in the emptiness of the cemetery. Hello, is someone there? The figure doesn't respond. I take another step, my pulse hammering in my ears. The silence around me is oppressive, suffocating. My feet seem to drag with every step, the weight of the air thickening. I can barely breathe, but I keep moving, against my better judgment. When I'm just a few feet away, I stop, frozen in place. The figure remains unmoving, its form slightly slumped as if it's waiting for something or someone. I can't make out any features in the dim light, just the outline of a tall person, their body draped in something dark, blending into the night. For a long moment, I just stand there, watching, trying to make sense of what I'm seeing. And then, as if on cue, the figure shifts. Not a movement, but a sudden flicker, like the shadows themselves are moving. It's then that I realize, it's not a person at all, not really. It's more like a silhouette, a shadow of a person, but with no discernible face or details. Just an outline, a ghostly shape that shouldn't be there. My heart skips a beat, and I step back, instinctively reaching for my phone, my fingers trembling. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to explain this, but I'm certain this is not normal. Whatever this is, it's not something I should be seeing. The hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as I back away slowly, keeping my eyes locked on the shape. And then just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanishes. It doesn't move away or fade. It just disappears, like it was never there in the first place. I blink, my mind struggling to catch up with what just happened. 1 second, it's there. The next, it's gone. I stand frozen, staring at the spot where the figure had been, trying to make sense of what I've just witnessed. My thoughts are a jumbled mess, my pulse still racing. This place has always been quiet, peaceful, but tonight it feels different. The air is heavier now, almost suffocating, and I realize that I'm no longer alone. I can feel it. I can feel the weight of something in the air, pressing down on me. My instincts scream at me to run, but I can't move. My feet feel like they're glued to the ground. I hear a sound, faint at first, but growing louder, a whisper, barely audible, coming from the direction of the crypts. I turn, my heart in my throat, but there's nothing there. The whispers stop, the air becomes still again, but the feeling of being watched doesn't go away. It lingers, hanging over me like a heavy fog. I back away, slowly at first, then faster, until I'm almost running, my breath shallow and frantic. The whisper follows me, faint but constant, as I make my way back toward the entrance of the cemetery. When I reach the gate, I stop and glance back one last time. The cemetery is silent once again, as if nothing had happened. No shadowy figure, no whispers, just the quiet emptiness of the graves. But deep down, I know that something is watching me. I don't know what it is or why it's here, but I can feel it, lingering just beyond my reach. As I lock the gate behind me, I glance over my shoulder, and I swear, in the distance, just by the crypts, I see it again. The faintest outline of a figure standing there in the shadows, watching, waiting. I turn and walk away, my steps hurried, the air growing colder with every step. I don't look back again, but I can feel it. I know it's still there, watching, and it always will be. The air in the room was thick with the smell of antiseptic and something more faint, something I couldn't quite place. As I stood by the bed, it was the kind of smell that always seemed to hang around the walls of the hospice, the scent of sickness, of endings. You get used to it after a while, but tonight, it was different. There was something in the air, something I couldn't shake off, an oppressive weight that felt like the very walls were closing in on me. The soft, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor beside the bed was the only sound in the room. It was constant, almost soothing in its predictability, but there was something unsettling about it tonight. Something about the stillness of the room made the beeping feel off, like it wasn't just measuring heartbeats anymore, like it was counting down to something else. My name is Emma. I'm 29, and I've been a hospice nurse for 3 years now. I'm used to the quiet, the slow, sometimes agonizing process of death. It's not easy, but it's part of the job, and we get good at it. We learn how to distance ourselves, how to detach from the faces, the voices, the stories. But there are days, nights like tonight, when the walls of this place feel too tight, and the people, the ones lying in the beds, don't feel like patients anymore. They feel like ghosts waiting to be freed. This particular room, room 407, was one of those rooms I never liked. Not because of the patient who'd been here for the past few weeks. No, it was because of the things that happened in that room. Or rather, the things that didn't happen. The moments in between the beeps, when everything felt like it was holding its breath, just waiting. Tonight, the patient in question, Mr. Delaney, was in his final hours. He was in his mid-70s, a frail man, with a soft, raspy voice, and eyes that had seen too much. When he had arrived at the hospice, he hadn't said much, just that he wanted to be left in peace. and like all patients, we respected that. But I could tell, even then, that he was holding on to something that wasn't just a fight for breath. I've been with him most of the night. I've been holding his hand, speaking softly when he stirs, adjusting his position every few hours to ease his pain. I had become familiar with the soft rasp of his breath, the way his fingers would twitch every now and then, as if trying to grasp something beyond the world he could see. But tonight, something had changed. It started just before his pulse began to weaken. The soft glow of the dim light above the bed flickered, once, twice, and then stayed steady. I thought nothing of it. It was a hospice, after all. The lights sometimes had their moments of failure, but the flickering felt deliberate, like a signal. It was as if the room was acknowledging something, or someone. I was adjusting his blanket when I noticed it. A faint whisper, no louder than the sound of a breeze through the window, but distinct enough to catch my attention. I paused, listening closely, my hand hovering over the blanket. It was coming from Mr. Delaney's lips, or at least, that's what I thought. His voice was barely audible, just a breath, barely a sound at all. "Emma." I took a step back, my heart thudding louder than it should have, given the quietness of the room. But I had to have misheard. He couldn't have said my name. Mr. Delaney hadn't spoken in days. But when I leaned in closer, to check if he needed something, his eyes fluttered open, just a crack, just enough to catch the faint light from the bedside lamp. And when his eyes met mine, I froze. There was something there, something in those eyes, a depth, a pain, like he wasn't just seeing me, like he was seeing through me, to something beyond. "Please help me." His voice was weak, barely a rasp, but it trembled with something urgent. I leaned closer, my fingers tightening around his hand. "Mr. Delaney, you're okay. You're safe." He shook his head ever so slightly, wincing as though the movement itself caused him pain. It's not over." His words came in broken gasps. You have to understand." His breathing was growing shallower, his chest rising and falling, in a rhythm that felt like it could stop at any moment. But I didn't know what he meant. What wasn't over? He had been here for weeks, accepting his fate, knowing the end was inevitable. What could he be talking about? Before I could ask again, his eyes closed, his hand slackening in mine. The heart monitor beside the bed let out a single high-pitched beep, a warning, a final warning. My mind raced, but my body acted on its own, calling for help, hitting the button for a doctor. But by the time they arrived, it was too late. Mr. Delaney's body was still, his chest unmoving. The final breath had come and gone. I stood there, watching, trying to absorb the sudden stillness, the absence of the man who had been here for so long. But in the silence, I felt something, a presence. The room felt heavier, and I realized that it wasn't over, not in the way Mr. Delaney had meant. For the next few hours, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. It was subtle at first, just a draft in the corner, an odd sensation on the back of my neck. But then it became something more. The lamp flickered again. The whispers returned, low and distant, like a breeze in the walls, and I could swear that for a moment, I saw it, his face, not as it had been, pale and exhausted, but as it had once been, youthful and whole. A smile crossed his lips, faint but there, as though he was waiting for something, someone. I couldn't explain it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed him into that room, something tied to his death, something unfinished. The doctor came back in, giving me a sympathetic look. "It's time to prepare him for transport to the morgue," she said softly. I nodded, still unable to fully shake the unease crawling up my spine. I was doing my best to stay professional, but inside, I was shaking. And just as the doctor turned to leave, I heard it again, the faintest whisper, barely more than a sigh in the air. but it was unmistakable. "Help me." I spun around, heart racing, expecting to see Mr. Delaney sitting up, but there was nothing, just the cold, empty room. The only sound was the steady hum of the overhead lights. My eyes scanned the room, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of the mind. But something told me that it wasn't. Something was unfinished here. Something had followed him. When the doctor left, I stood by the bed for a while, the weight of the moment settling on my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that Mr. Delaney wasn't gone, not entirely. And then as I turned to leave, something caught my eye just by the window. A shadow, faint but undeniable. It was him, but it wasn't just him anymore. It was something else, something different. The shadow was all wrong, like the shape of a person, but not quite. The edges were blurry, shifting. I walked quickly, faster than I should have, out of the room, but I didn't dare look back. The whispers never stopped, not that night, and not the nights that followed. A dim hallway stretched before me, endless and empty, a faint yellow light flickering from a single bulb at the far end. I wasn't supposed to be here. This part of the hospital had been closed off for months, but somehow I still found myself walking through it. The silence was heavy, like a thick curtain that wrapped itself around me, muffling any sound I made. My footsteps swallowed by the oppressive quiet. I glanced over my shoulder, but the hallway was still empty. Just the empty, lifeless walls staring back at me, their peeling paint like a reminder of years long forgotten. The air here was stale, heavy with dust, and smelled faintly of old paper and something I couldn't place, something wrong, unsettling. The hallway was a relic. Years ago, it had been bustling, filled with doctors, nurses, patients, and the sickening sounds of medical machines. But that was before the renovation. After the budget cuts, they had decided to close off this wing, an old part of the hospital that had once been a psychiatric unit. Not many knew about it anymore. The new staff had no idea, and the patients rarely asked. But I had worked here long enough to know the old stories, the ones that had been whispered in the break rooms, the ones that kept the lights flickering at night, the ones I had always dismissed as nothing more than rumors. But tonight was different. My name is Sarah, and I'm a night nurse. I've worked at St. Mark's for 5 years now, always the one on the late shift. Most nights, I'm alone. The other nurses head home, and I'm left to do rounds, to sit with patients whose bodies are giving out, but whose minds are still very much awake. But tonight, something was off. Something about the quiet, the way the building seemed to hum with an energy that didn't belong. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I had finished my rounds early, and when I saw the flickering light down the hallway, curiosity tugged at me. I thought it might be a fuse going out, or maybe an issue with the building's aging wiring. But as I walked closer, I realized there was something else. The air had changed, and it wasn't just the stale dust, or the faint acrid smell of decay. It was something else, something thicker, more oppressive. The light at the end of the hall flickered again, casting strange shadows against the walls. I hesitated, but forced myself to move forward. It wasn't like me to be afraid, to let my imagination run wild. But there was something about this place that had always unsettled me. The hospital had changed so much over the years, but the older parts, the ones that were abandoned or closed off, had a weight to them, a weight I couldn't shake. I reached the end of the hallway, where the light flickered erratically, and I noticed the door. It was half open, the rusted metal frame creaking slightly as it swayed in the draft. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't on any of the blueprints, or on the list of rooms. There were no signs to mark what it was, and no staff had ever mentioned it. But here it was, just waiting. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I should turn back. I should go back to the nurse's station and call it a night. But my feet were already moving, drawn to the door, as if something was calling me forward. The closer I got, the colder the air became, until I felt a chill that pierced through my uniform, settling deep in my bones. The door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a small room bathed in shadow. It wasn't large, barely the size of a closet, but inside was something that made my blood run cold. There was an old cot, the sheets soiled and torn, a wooden chair that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, and a small window that was sealed shut with layers of grime. The room felt wrong, like it had been abandoned in a hurry, left behind, forgotten. I took a step forward, the air thick with dust, and something else, something heavier, like the room itself was holding its breath. My eyes fell on the walls, and that's when I saw it. The scribbled writing. At first it looked like nonsense, scratches and lines, jagged and uneven. But the longer I stared, the more the shapes seemed to form words. And they weren't just words. They were pleas, cries, desperation. Help me, one said. Don't let them take me. Read another. The last one, scrawled in thick red lines, made my stomach twist. Wake me up, before it's too late. I stepped back, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. My breathing felt shallow, as though the air had suddenly become too thick to draw in. I turned to leave, but then from behind me, I heard it. A soft sound, a shuffle, a whisper. I froze, my heart hammered in my chest, and I held my breath, my body tense. My instincts screamed at me to run, to get out of that room before whatever had made that sound decided to make itself known. But I couldn't move. My feet were planted to the ground, my mind paralyzed by the terror creeping up my spine. And then the whisper came again, closer this time. Help me. I turned slowly, my head swiveling to the corner of the room. For a split second, I thought I saw something there. A figure, crouched, its head low, its body trembling. But when I blinked, it was gone. The air grew colder still, and I felt something brush against my skin. A hand, light and fleeting, but undeniably there. Please, the voice came again, faint but desperate. Please don't leave. I stumbled backward, my breath coming in sharp gasps. As I ran for the door, I reached for the handle, but my hand passed right through it. The door wasn't there anymore. The room had swallowed it, and I was trapped. I turned, frantic now, but the shadows in the room were closing in, enveloping me. The walls seemed to stretch, to distort, until I was no longer in the small room. I was in that hallway again, but it felt different. It felt endless. The walls stretched and warped, the lights flickering in a rhythm that felt wrong. I wasn't alone anymore. The shadows were alive, shifting, whispering, reaching for me. Help me. The voice came again, closer this time, as though it was beside me, in my ear. I screamed, my hands reaching out to grab anything, to find an escape. But it was no use. The shadows were everywhere now, and the whispers were all I could hear. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the world snapped back. The hallway was empty again, the light flickering at the end, as if nothing had happened. I was standing outside, room 213, my fingers clutching the door frame, my body shaking with the aftershock of something I couldn't explain. The hallway was silent, the air was still, but the feeling of being watched, of being pulled into something dark and ancient, still lingered. I don't know how long I stood there, my mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. But when I turned around to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something that had always been here, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Some lives go unrecorded, and their souls remain unsettled. The old oak door to my office creaked in protest every time I opened it. Inside, thousands of names lay etched in leather-bound ledgers, each representing a life laid to rest beneath these grounds. The lantern's glow made the dust in the air seem alive, swirling like lost spirits in the narrow beam. Here, in the hush of record-keeping, I sometimes feel a presence more alive than any flesh-and-blood mourner. It's in the pages that go blank, the entries that vanish when no one is watching, as if someone or something is rewriting history from the shadows. My name is Thomas Hale. I'm 52 years old, the cemetery's register keeper for over 15 years. I'm entrusted with archiving every burial, every epitaph, every date. I thought this job would be a quiet refuge from a world too loud, but lately, it's become a prison of whispers and vanished ink. I haven't slept through a night in months, because the silence of this place no longer comforts me. It torments me. It started when I noticed an entry erased in broad daylight. A family name I knew well, Riverview, simply gone. I remember the funeral, the mother's tears, the child's casket lowered gently into the earth. I double-checked the ledger by lamplight, convinced I was mistaken, but the name had vanished completely, leaving only a smudge of ink. I felt my chest tighten with dread. Who else would know that line, that date, that little boy named Henry, and who would want to erase him? Over the next week, more names disappeared, not whole pages, just single entries, as though someone scraped them away with a razor. At first, I blamed bad eyesight, fatigue, or ink that had simply faded, but then the handwriting changed. I would arrive in the morning to find new scribbles in margins, hasty and jumbled. Find me, she waits, remember us. In my careful, precise script, those weren't my words. One night, determined to catch whoever or whatever was altering the records, I stayed late. The moon cast silver bands across my desk as I watched the ledgers. My lamp guttered once, twice, and then died, plunging me into darkness. I heard a soft rustle, like paper brushing against paper. My heart thundered. I dared not move. Then the lamp flickered back on, and I saw it, the pages fluttering on their own, as if caught in a whisper of wind. But the window was sealed. I stepped forward, voice shaking. Who's there? No answer. The pages settled, and I thought it over. I'd heard stories of souls who couldn't rest because they were forgotten, of grief too deep to be contained by mere death. But until now, I'd never believed. I reached to steady the ledger. My fingers brushed the page where Henry Riverview's name had been. In fresh ink, I saw 2 words appear: help me. A cold finger of dread crawled up my spine. I yanked back my hand, but the page didn't cease. The letters kept forming, as if guided by an invisible hand. I tried to blot the ink, but it resisted. I couldn't erase it. And then, behind me, I heard breathing, soft, deliberate, not my own. I spun around, lamp tilting, casting dancing shadows among the shelves. There was no one there, but the breathing continued, echoing in the archive room like a ragged breath from beneath the floorboards. I fled back to my desk and turned on every light in the office. The shadows retreated, but I couldn't shake the sense of eyes upon me. I forced myself to sit, heart pounding, and opened the ledger to the next blank page, an unused volume for next year's burials. The very first line, in neat script that wasn't mine, read, "Don't forget me." I stared until my vision blurred, and then I felt it, a quiet sob, so low I almost missed it. It came from the rafters above, then again from the corner where my chair sat. The sobbing grew into a keening whisper of children's voices, crying out names I'd never heard. I covered my ears, but the sound did not relent. It rose to a keening pitch, the chorus of forgotten dead, demanding to be heard. I bolted from the office, slamming the door behind me. The sobbing stopped instantly, and the corridor was deathly silent. I breathed in ragged gulps, staring at the locked door. What had I unleashed? I didn't sleep that night. In the dark, I heard the gentle tap-tap of a ledger closing somewhere in the archive, followed by a whisper, "Remember." In the morning, I refused to go back. I told the groundskeeper I was catching up on paperwork at home, but names kept slipping from my memory. Old friends, childhood teachers, neighbors who'd passed quietly. My dreams were filled with blank pages and ghostly ink. By the third night, I forced myself back inside the records room. The lamp burned steady, and I cleared my throat. "I will not forget you," I said aloud. "I promise to remember every name." My voice echoed back, hollow and uncertain. I opened the ledger to the page that had held Henry Riverview's name. To my astonishment, the name was written there in my own handwriting, fresh and clear. Beneath it, in smaller script, "Thank you." The sobbing returned then, but gentler this time, like a child's soft cry of relief. And I understood. These souls weren't angry. They were lost, without memory, without names. They could not find rest. They had used me, their keeper, to write themselves back into history. I filled the pages with care that night, re-entering every erased name, every smudged date, meticulously restoring what had been lost. The air lightened as I wrote, the lantern's glow growing warmer, the dust motes settling into stillness. When I finally closed the ledger, the room felt empty, peaceful. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves once more, but it carried no urgent whispers now, only a gentle sigh, like a breath released at last. As I turned off the lamp, I whispered to the dark, "You are remembered." And in the silence that followed, I believed it was enough.